They can collect any data from anyone, and they must comply. They can shut down your internet. They can shut down your business. But just so everybody knows, none of this affects your privacy. Are you kidding me? The Liberal government introduced Bill C-8 under the guise of protecting Canadians from cybersecurity threats. And for the most part, it does that. But at what cost? If it passes unchanged, the price will be your online privacy, your online data, and you may never even know that you've paid it, because all of it will be taken in complete secrecy. Let's take a look. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you House of Commons of Canada Bill C-8, an act respecting cybersecurity, amending the Telecommunications Act and making consequential amendments to other acts. First reading, June 18th, 2025, Minister of Public Safety. Here's our summary. Part 1 amends the Telecommunications Act to add the promotion of the security of the Canadian telecommunications system as an objective of the Canadian telecommunications policy, and to authorize the Governor-in-Council and the Minister of Industry to direct telecommunications service providers to do anything or refrain from doing anything that is necessary to secure the Canadian telecommunications system. It also establishes an administrative monetary penalty scheme to promote compliance with orders and regulations made by the Governor-in-Council and the Minister of Industry to secure the Canadian telecommunications system, as well as rules for judicial review of those orders and regulations. Part 2 enacts the Critical Cyber Systems Protection Act to provide a framework for the protection of the critical cyber systems of services and systems that are vital to national security or public safety and that are delivered or operated as part of a work, undertaking, or business that is within the legislative authority of Parliament. It also, among other things, authorizes the Governor-in-Council to designate any service or system as a vital service or vital system. B. Authorizes the Governor-in-Council to establish classes of operators in respect of a vital service or system. C. Requires designated operators to, among other things, establish and implement cybersecurity programs, mitigate supply chain and third-party risks, report cybersecurity incidents, and comply with cybersecurity directions. D. Provides for the exchange of information between relevant parties. And E. Authorizes the enforcement of the obligations under the Act and imposes consequences for non-compliance. This part also makes consequential amendments to certain acts. So there's a lot in there. And it sounds alarming in some cases, and in some cases it is. But one of the things that I keep hearing during the debate of this is when the members of Parliament stand up, they say, "I'm not a cybersecurity expert." That's what I hear. And this is something that I think is very relevant, especially when it comes to this act, because this act authorizes the Governor-in-Council, aka this is the Prime Minister, making a recommendation to the Governor-in-Council, meaning the Governor-General, to issue an order in council to go and do something. That's basically what this is doing. Or the Minister of Industry, in this case, this would be Melanie Joly, to issue orders to tell telecommunications companies to do anything or not do anything. That's basically what it means. Now, let's just be objective here. As someone who's been in the cybersecurity industry and information technology industry for 20 years, I need to set some of the ground rules in cybersecurity. So, number one, if you've ever been a part of a cybersecurity incident, you will notice the eerie similarity to viral outbreaks, like actual biological viral outbreaks. And the mitigation activities that you usually take against cybersecurity threats mirror what are done in viral outbreaks when it comes to biological viruses, pathogens, all of that. I've managed multiple large-scale incidents. One of the largest that I've actually done is when I used to work for Canada's Global Television, and we had an outbreak of a virus, and it was not so much a virus in that it was destructive. It was let's just say it was a malicious piece of software that infiltrated our network, and what it tried to do is gain access to all of the administrative credentials for all the critical systems. That's what it ended up trying to do. Now, the main issue isn't that it was going to gain access to those systems. It wasn't that sophisticated. Is that it was locking out all of the major accounts that were actually used to operate these critical systems. So, how did this happen? Well, like anything, it didn't just come in the front door. What ended up happening is we leased a bunch of third-party computers to cover an election, and they were going to be set up as like a press pit. So they were all brought in, and they were all turned on, and turns out these were all accidentally set up by the company that we leased them from, and they were all preloaded with this virus. That's what ended up happening, that we found out after the fact. But why am I talking about all this? One of the things that we engaged in is when we detected that there was a specific computer that was responsible, that was infected with this thing. One of the first things that we would do is we would have the local IT people find that machine and disconnect it from the network. Containment, right? Just like you do when you identify a case of somebody that has a nasty virus in real life. You will try and contain that, separate that off from the rest of the population. Well, in the IT industry, you separate that either via network or you unplug it completely. So when you're talking about a large scale cyber attack, which is nationwide or province-wide or citywide, one of the things that needs to be available is to be able to isolate. And in order to do that, telecommunications companies or individual organizations within that geographical area need to be directed to take certain mitigation measures. Okay, so this is what comes down to directed to do anything or not do anything. But here's the big but. All of these MPs are standing up during debate and saying, I'm not a cybersecurity expert. Well, I don't want to see any of these MPs making any determination, because a lot of the language you're going to see is, if the minister feels it's relevant. Well, you're not going to have the expertise to decide whether it's relevant or not. I digress, but there's ways to do this, and I'll get into them a little bit later, that actually do protect our charter rights and do ensure that there is some oversight when it comes to what this is trying to do. So let's get into the most problematic parts of Bill C-8. This is part one. And this is where we start to really drill into this. So we're at section 15.1, subsection 1. Security of Canadian Telecommunication System Order in Council. This is the equivalent of the executive order in the United States. If the Governor and Council, aka Prime Minister, believes on reasonable grounds that it is necessary to do so to secure the Canadian telecommunication system against any threat, including that of interference, manipulation, disruption, or degradation, the Governor and Council may, by order and after consultation with the persons the Governor and Council considers appropriate, A, prohibit a telecommunications service provider from using all products and services provided by a specified person in or in relation to its telecommunications network or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. B, direct a telecommunications service provider to remove all products. So this is, in summary, this means they can tell them to do anything or they can prevent them from doing anything. So let's skip down to 3, non-disclosure. The order may also include a provision prohibiting the disclosure of its existence or some or all of its contents by any person. What that means, folks, is that the Prime Minister decides, you know what, we need to have Cogeco or have Rogers shut down the entire network in southwestern Ontario. They can issue an order in council and make that happen. And the only people that the Prime Minister has to consult with are people that he deems appropriate and relevant. The non-cybersecurity experts get to decide who is relevant and who is appropriate to actually consult with. How are you going to know what's appropriate and what's relevant if you don't have subject matter expertise in this case? Now, the government has an agency called the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity. Don't you think you should probably consult with them? Don't you think you should probably put that in here as it's mandatory to consult with them? Might be an idea. Don't you think it might be a good idea to consult with the actual organization and their cybersecurity team? Don't you think that would be relevant? Because I do. Because they're going to have a lot more knowledge and subject matter expertise of their own network than you do, which is you have none. You're a politician. And not a politician that comes from a cybersecurity background. Those are very, very rare. Factors. This is supposed to make us all feel warm and cuddly. Before making the order, the Governor and Council must consider A, its operational impact on the affected telecommunications service providers. B, its financial impact on the affected telecommunications service providers. C, its effect on the provision of telecommunication services in Canada. And D, any other factor that the Governor in Council considers relevant. Let's skip down to subsection 8 there. No compensation. No one is entitled to any compensation from His Majesty in right of Canada for any financial losses resulting from the making of an order under subsection 1. So this basically says that the people with no subject matter expertise whatsoever get to decide what is relevant. They get to decide what the potential impact is based on the people that they're consulting with, which they don't really have to consult with anybody, only people they deal with deem appropriate. And if they make a mistake, if they say shut down the southwestern network in Ontario, all of the internet organizations that are part of that will probably lose a whole bunch of customers, because remember, this doesn't have to be disclosed. So the ball actually falls back on Rogers, and the ball falls on Cogeco, because they're going to be flooded with people saying, "Why the hell is my internet down?" And they can't say anything. They can't say, "Well, it was the government." They can't say that. So they're wearing this, right? As far as the public knows, this was an outage, and this was those organizations incompetent in how they're running their network. And then, if that was just an oops and that shouldn't have been shut down in the first place, and the Prime Minister and the government made a mistake, they don't have to compensate these organizations at all for that mistake. So the people that are least qualified to make these determinations and are most likely to make bad decisions and mistakes are the people that don't actually have to pay any financial compensation whatsoever. Wow. We move on. If there are reasonable grounds to believe that it is necessary to do so to secure the Canadian telecommunications system against any threat, including that of interference, manipulation, disruption, or degradation, the Minister may, by order and after consultation with the Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness, and with the persons the Minister considers appropriate, A, prohibit a telecommunications service provider from providing any service to any specified person, including a telecommunications service provider. And B, direct a telecommunications service provider to suspend providing for a specified period any service to any specified person, including a telecommunications service provider. I think we all know what that means, but I'll summarize anyway. If Gary decides that Northern Perspective is a threat, Gary can say, a service provider that provides service to Northern Perspective, they're not allowed to have any service whatsoever to their phones, to their devices, any of their accounts. Done. That's a problem. Why is that a problem? Well, number one, you are authorizing a politically elected person. You're allowing them to make a political decision, not necessarily a cybersecurity decision, a political decision to shut down the internet service of one of their constituents, of one of their citizens. And there's no oversight here, folks. None. It's all on the minister. It's all on the politicians. That's dangerous. Absolutely dangerous. What if they decide that the opposition parties are a threat, right? Because you have to take these laws to the extreme to understand what the test is and what the capability is. These laws can't just be tested for a government that has good intentions. And there's debate whether or not the Liberal government actually has good intentions. But let's just assume that they do, for the sake of argument. You cannot review a law just applied to governments that have good intentions. You have to review a law against a government that has bad intentions. And this is a dangerous, dangerous piece in this law. You don't have to have this via a government order. That can be at the discretion of the internet service provider. But I would also be interested in the argument that one computer in the middle of the country is going to be responsible for a national cybersecurity outage. Like, if you go down the rabbit hole, sure, you could probably justify it. But this comes to the debate that always happens in cybersecurity. Possibility versus probability. Is it possible? Sure. Is it probable? I don't know. If it's possible, there needs to be checks and balances, that this is not a political decision, but a cybersecurity mitigation decision. That's the difference here. And the way it's laid out, that has the potential to not happen at all. Going back to the same section, I'm not going to go through all of this because this just details, and you can read it for yourself, all of the different things that the minister can tell these telecommunications service providers to do if he believes it's in the best interest of the defense of Canada when it comes to cybersecurity threats. Again, we see this non-disclosure. An order made under subsection 1 or 2 may also include a provision prohibiting the disclosure of its existence or some or all of its contents by any person. That's a problem, folks. Now, it's interesting because if you jump down to number 7, pre-publication, the minister may, that's the operative word, cause a draft order to be published in the Canada Gazette. Going down to part 10, again, no compensation. So if they make a mistake and they cause a huge loss of revenue for, say, Northern Perspective, oops, we didn't mean to. Yeah, that was a mistake, even though they would never even tell us that it was a mistake, and we wouldn't even know that it was the government. Any revenue that we would lose, we're not entitled to compensation because of a mistake by someone who made a political decision or is just completely inept because they have no subject matter expertise to make these decisions in the first place. Report on orders. This is where the Liberals are going to tell you that they're being very transparent. So basically what they have to do is within 3 months after the end of each fiscal year, or if either House is not then sitting or any of the first 15 days of the next sitting of that House, a report on the orders made under subsection 15.1 and 2 must be tabled. Contents of that report, basically the numbers of reports that were made, the numbers of orders that were revoked, the number of telecommunication service providers affected by an order, a description of compliance of telecommunication service providers that partially complied, fully complied with the orders, and an explanation if of the necessity, reasonableness, and utility of the orders. Now, one of the main problems here comes with some of the lines that are actually in 15.1 and 2 in the first place. Because if you recall, in 15.1 and 2, there are these non-disclosure lines that says, essentially, these orders, if necessary, if deemed necessary, can be hidden from existence. Meaning, they're not going to be counted in this report. So what's the point? What's the point? And this is where the problems really start to rear their heads, because how do we know? What's the check and balance that these orders aren't being done maliciously? How do we know? And what's the check and balance that these orders are being done responsibly or being done with the appropriate skill level, with the appropriate competence? Because these orders the bad orders may be executed not out of maliciousness, but just out of sheer incompetence, or both. And there's no check and balance for anyone to actually oversee that. Here's the next part. Provision of information. The minister may require any person to provide to the minister or any person designated by the minister within any time and subject to any conditions that the minister may specify any information that the minister believes on reasonable grounds is relevant for the purpose of making, amending, or revoking an order under section 15.1 or 15.2 or a regulation under paragraph 15.8 or of verifying compliance or preventing non-compliance with such an order or regulation. What does that mean? Means that the minister, the way this is written, can order literally anybody in the country, can order any organization in the country to provide any information, any data, no matter how confidential, no matter how private, no matter what the scope of it is. They must provide it to the government. No questions asked. Now, here's the question, and you're all probably asking it. Am I going to know that they're doing that? Disclosure of information. 15.7. Any information collected or obtained under this act, other than information designated as confidential under subsection 15.5, may be disclosed by the minister under an agreement, a memorandum of understanding, or an arrangement in writing between the Government of Canada and the government of a province or of a foreign state, an international organization of states, or an international organization established by government of states, or any institution, etc., 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 if the minister believes that the information may be relevant to securing the Canadian telecommunication system or the telecommunication system of a foreign state, including against the threat of interference, manipulation, or disrupted use. You'll not only not know that this happened, because again, when they collect this information, and then they create these orders, the orders can be designated as secret, so you'd never know it even happened. So that's the first part. And the second part is the minister, in his vast expertise in cybersecurity, sarcasm sign, the minister can decide to share it with anybody, any foreign state. And you'd never know. Where's the check and balance that actually taps the minister on the shoulder and says, you really think you should be sharing that? I don't think you should be sharing that. That would force the minister to say, oh, okay, I'm not going to share that. Maybe that was the wrong call. Here's the best part, folks. 15.71. For greater certainty, nothing in sections 15.1, 2, 4, 7 affects the provisions of the Privacy Act. Really? They can collect any data from anyone, and they must comply. They can shut down your internet. They can shut down your business. But just so everybody knows, none of this affects your privacy. Are you kidding me? Of course it affects your privacy. And you wouldn't even know. That's the big part. You wouldn't even know. Now, there are situations where citizens shouldn't know that their data is actually being collected, right? If there's a criminal investigation, legit criminal investigation, that needs to happen in private. You can't just say, hey, criminals, we're going to be surveilling you now. We're going to be collecting your data. But there are processes in place to allow that to happen supposedly absent political interference. And again, we're going to get into that. But this is all at the behest of the political establishment. Nobody else. That's the biggest red flag in this entire piece. Judicial review. This is another one of those warm and fuzzy sections. The following rules apply to judicial review proceedings in respect of an order made under section 15.1 or 15.2 or a regulation made under paragraph 15.8. If the judge determines that the evidence or other information provided by the minister is not relevant, or if the minister withdraws the evidence or other information, the decision of the judge must not be based on that evidence or other information, and the judge must return it to the minister, and B, the judge must ensure the confidentiality of all evidence and other information that the minister withdraws. So here's the issue. They talk about judicial review in this, but there's no mandate that any of these orders are actually reviewed by a judge or the judiciary. And this is the biggest red flag in this whole thing. The only way that it actually would be reviewed by a judge is if after it becomes public in the Gazette, after it becomes public in this report tabled to Parliament, then the people that would actually be subject to these orders would become potentially aware of it if they're paying attention, and then they'd be able to issue a court challenge to that. However, if by way of this very legislation, an order is executed and the minister states that it must be kept confidential, then it's not going to be executed in a way that it's published in the report, and it's not going to be published in the Gazette, and it's not going to be sent. It's impossible to be sent for a judicial review, because in order to actually contest it, you have to be aware of its existence. And if you're not aware of its existence, then you can't challenge it. How do you challenge an order that you don't know exists? So this is one of those, oh, look, we have judicial review in here, but only in the case that we're going to make it possible. Massive, massive red flag here when it comes to oversight. Now, there's administrative monetary penalties, security of the Canadian telecommunications system. Let's assume that all these red flags were not present in the bill, right? Let's just assume that for a minute. You need some sort of teeth to something like this to ensure that people comply, and you ensure that communications companies comply with your legislation. So let's say those red flags were not there. I have no problem with this, because if all those red flags were not there, and there's proper oversight, and there's certainty that this is going to be executed responsibly only in the cases of cybersecurity threats and legitimate ones, then this is all fine. It's all fine, because companies must be forced to comply in the greater interest of national security. But the red flags are there. This isn't the concern itself. It's everything around it that's the concern. Now, before I give you the complete summary of the analysis here, and I know this video is going a little long, but it's important, and this needs to be shared, folks. So do us a favor, hype the video, share this, and get it out there. I wanted to show you part of the debate. It's very, very brief, challenging Gary Nanasangri on the actual privacy issues that the Senate actually found with this bill's predecessor, C-26, in the last Parliament, and wanted to show you a little bit about Frank Caputo, who was the critic in this area for the Conservatives.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for his comments. When this bill came in the last Parliament, C-26, it went to the Senate, and Senator Denise Batters was the critic for the file. And the Privacy Commissioner came and said that there was an amendment needed to address privacy. Now, the Senator has reviewed C-8 and says that amendment was not incorporated. So I would ask the Minister, why did he not take the advice of the Privacy Commissioner?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As this bill goes through the parliamentary process, whether here or through committee or to the other place, we would, of course, welcome the opportunity to discuss additional measures we need to take. Bill C-8 was introduced in the form that it was completed when C-26 went through all the processes, and this is just a continuation of that process, Madam Speaker. So I believe that we've incorporated all the proposals from the previous version of this bill, but we do look forward to having a robust discussion at committee.
So in short, because it wasn't presented as a formal amendment and voted on in the House, we're just going to ignore it. That's what that answer is. So, you know, and the Liberals are saying, why can't we just pass this through? Why can't we pass this through? Well, because there's big problems with this thing. All around privacy. That's the biggest problem. And it's been called out by the Privacy Commissioner, by the Conservative senators. Needs to be addressed. So that's not really a great answer.
For those of people who are watching Bill C-2, which is a parallel piece of legislation, also a piece of legislation that is sponsored and put forward by the Public Safety Minister. This notion of confidentiality, I understand it. I've worked as a lawyer for many years, and I know that confidentiality has to happen. But far too often, what I see in this House is I see something that is laudable or a laudable cause, a cause that we should be embracing. You know, sometimes secret things have to remain secret. The problem is far too often in this House, what I see is that the Liberal government goes further. Yeah, we have to keep some things secret, but we're just going to keep everything secret. Yes, we have to do this in this regard, but we're going to go one step further. And what that does is it puts the opposition in a really awful place, because we might agree with the goal of the legislation, but we don't agree with the mechanism by which we get to the goal. And that's when we have protracted debates, and we go into committee, sometimes for 8 committee meetings. And at the end of the day, what it does is it results in vigorous debate, which is actually wonderful. We should have vigorous debate in this place. But at the end of the day, the government will often hear from stakeholders, as they did in former Bill C-26, and that is then walked back. There were so many amendments. I know that I saw that I believe all but 1 or 2 of the Conservative amendments that were put forward in the former Bill C-26 were adopted. So just a note there as to, I don't understand it. I see the same thing in Bill C-2 as I see here in Bill C-8. An example, the mail provisions in Bill C-2. The government can open your mail. Okay, well, why is that? The whole purpose is that in C-2, in the Canada Post Corporation Act, I believe it's called, the government is worried about fentanyl being sent through the mail. A notable concern, a laudable concern. Anything under 500 grams can't be opened. So let's make sure that letters under 500 grams can be opened, so that 499 grams of fentanyl and fentanyl precursors can't get opened. That's the goal. Great. Now, how do we go about achieving that goal? In C-2, we go about achieving that goal saying the Canada Post, not a peace officer, has reasonable suspicion, and they can open up your mail without a warrant.
It's this creeping totalitarianism, folks. You need to surrender your rights so we can protect you. You need to surrender your ability to protect your own privacy so we can protect your privacy for you. We should be entrusted by that. No. No. The government needs to get out of your hair. And there should be due process. So, Frank Caputo and the Conservatives, what are they saying? They're saying that this bill, not the details, but the idea of this bill is a good thing. I agree. There should be mechanisms to be able to mitigate mass cybersecurity attacks. Otherwise, the entire country remains vulnerable in an increasingly cyber world. We can all agree on that. The issue is all of the decision making when it comes to that is with the political actors. Now, everyone should know that the United States has similar legislation in place right now. And there's other countries that have similar legislation that have that in place right now. What's the major difference between the United States and their legislation as opposed to C-8? Well, they have to send every single one of these orders through judicial review. Some people have heard of things called FISA courts. So these are the specialized courts to review these types of things. Now, they can be kept secret if necessary to protect national security, but the difference is it's not the political actors making the decision. The political actors aren't even involved in this. Okay? A congressman or senator, which is our closest equivalent to our member of parliament, cannot make these orders. It's not in their hands. It's within the enforcement agencies themselves. Now, you can debate how much of a problem those enforcement agencies are. That's fine. But the difference is that it's reviewed. So even if a political actor directs one of these agencies to execute an order, it still has to be reviewed and it can be denied. That's the oversight, and that's what's missing in this entire process. And they have to disclose all of the FISA orders that they've actually put out. They don't have to disclose necessarily what's in them, but they have to disclose the number and all of this. The phantom of what they're trying to show in Bill C-8, but they actually have to show everything. So this is the main difference. And here's the other big difference. In the United States legislation, they cannot direct a telecommunications provider to shut down one person. Can't do that. What they can do is they can say, shut down this section, which makes sense. Makes sense, because if you're trying to contain something and it's spreading across the network, you need to be able to shut these things down, which makes sense. And again, who does it come from? It comes from the agency. The place where the specialization and the expertise actually is. Not from some stupid politician that has no idea what they're doing and no expertise, but they get to decide what's relevant, they get to decide what's appropriate, and they get to decide who to consult when they have zero expertise. So if they had all of that in place, and the American system isn't perfect, by the way, then this bill would make a lot more sense. If the minister isn't the one that can direct this, if the politicians aren't the ones that are writing the orders, if there was actual judicial review, now all of this starts to make a lot more sense. I still don't agree with you can shut down an individual person from the internet. But again, those can be hashed out in the amendments. So the most important thing when you're dealing with a cybersecurity incident, and I can tell you this from experience, is that you need people that are managing these situations that know what they're doing. They have competence, they have the expertise, and then they will have the trust of everybody that they're actually working with. Do I trust a lawyer that their expertise is in real estate to handle a national cybersecurity telecommunications issue? Hell no. Who would I trust? Somebody who is educated, somebody who has experience, and somebody who has the training and decades of experience with cybersecurity and manage multiple cybersecurity incidents en masse to be able to actually do that. then I trust that they're actually acting in the interest of mitigating the cybersecurity incident and not potentially out of some sort of political agenda or political malice. When we're reviewing legislation, I come back to it. You have to assume that a government with nefarious intent is using that legislation. And what's the worst that can happen? And ironically, when reviewing legislation, it's like IT. We have a saying. You plan for the worst, and you hope for the best.